They dragged her upstairs and locked the door while his mistress laughed downstairs. His mother called her worthless. His whole family celebrated her removal. But the old man in the Rolls-Royce didn't come for them. He came for his only granddaughter, the one who inherited everything they wanted. The dining room was alive with laughter and the clinking of expensive glasses. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over a table set with fine china and silver. The kind of setup that screamed money, status, everything Simone had never grown up with. She stood in the doorway, still wearing her medical scrubs from the hospital, her shoulders tight with exhaustion. She'd worked a double shift again, 16 hours on her feet, checking vitals, comforting patients, doing the work that kept that household running while everyone else inside lived like royalty. But when Simone walked into that dining room, what she saw made her blood run cold. There was a woman sitting at the head of the table, not just any woman, Candace, Brandon's co-worker, the one who always had too much to say whenever she came by, the one who looked at Simone like she was dirt on the bottom of her shoe. And right there, around Candace's neck, was Simone's jewelry, the pearl necklace Brandon had given her on their first anniversary, the only nice thing she owned. Candace was wearing it like it belonged to her. Simone's voice came out quiet, confused. "What's going on?" Brandon sat at the other end of the table, his eyes fixed on his plate. He wouldn't look at her, wouldn't even turn his head. Beverly, Brandon's mother, stood up slowly. She was a tall woman, elegant in that cold, controlled way. Every hair in place, every word calculated. She looked at Simone the way you'd look at a stray dog that wandered into your house. "Simone," Beverly said, her voice smooth as silk and just as cold. "We've made a decision. Brandon deserves better. Candace will be moving in. You'll need to leave." The words didn't land right away. Simone just stood there, her mind scrambling to make sense of what she'd just heard. Leave? Leave where? This was her home. She'd been married to Brandon for 4 years. 4 years of trying to fit in with this family that looked at her like she was a charity case. 4 years of working herself to the bone while Brandon searched for better opportunities that never came. 4 years of being told she wasn't good enough, wasn't polished enough, wasn't sophisticated enough. "Brandon," Simone's voice cracked when she said his name. "What is she talking about?" Brandon finally looked up. His face was blank, emotionless, like she was a stranger. "You've never fit in with this family, Simone. You're simple. Candace understands our lifestyle." The room went silent. All of Brandon's family was there. His aunts, his uncles, his cousins. People who'd eaten meals Simone had cooked. People who'd smiled in her face and talked behind her back. And now they all sat there, watching her humiliation like it was dinner theater. Some of them looked away, embarrassed. Others smirked like they'd been waiting for this moment. Simone tried to speak, tried to find words to defend herself, but Beverly cut her off with a wave of her hand. "You're embarrassing yourself, dear. Gerald Brandon handled this." And that's when it happened. Gerald, Brandon's father, stood up. Brandon stood up. They walked toward her, and before Simone could even process what was happening, they grabbed her by the arms. She was too shocked to fight back, too stunned to do anything but stumble as they dragged her toward the staircase. Her feet barely touched the ground. She heard Candace laughing behind her, heard Beverly's cold voice say something about finally moving forward. They pulled her up the stairs, down the hallway, and shoved her into the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. The door slammed shut, the lock clicked, and just like that, Simone was trapped. She stood there in the dark, her chest heaving, her mind spinning. Downstairs, the party continued. Music started playing, glasses clinked, laughter echoed through the walls. They were celebrating her removal, celebrating the fact that she was gone. Simone's legs gave out. She slid down the door, her back pressed against the wood, her hands trembling in her lap. She wanted to scream, wanted to cry, but nothing came out. She just sat there, numb, broken, trying to understand how her life had fallen apart in the span of 5 minutes. Her hand moved to her neck, fingers finding the small silver locket that hung there. It was the only thing she had left from her childhood, the only thing that connected her to the life she'd had before all of this. She opened it with shaking fingers, staring at the faded photo inside. A man she barely remembered. A man her mother had called Papa. A man who disappeared from her life when she was too young to understand why. Simone closed the locket and pressed it against her chest, whispering to herself in the dark, "Mama, I don't know what to do." Outside the window, car headlights swept across the driveway. Simone looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She watched as a black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the house, sleek and pristine, the kind of car that didn't belong in this neighborhood even though everyone here thought they were rich. A chauffeur stepped out and opened the back door. An elderly black man emerged, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than everything Simone had ever owned combined. He stood there for a moment, looking up at the house with an expression that could freeze fire. Cold, focused, dangerous. Simone didn't know who he was, but something in her chest tightened when she saw him. Something she couldn't explain. But to understand who Simone really was, we gotta go back. Way back. To before the betrayal. Before the marriage. Before she ever met Brandon. Simone grew up in a small town in rural Georgia, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and if you didn't have family, you didn't have much of anything. Her mother, Lorraine, was a seamstress. She worked out of their tiny house, sewing clothes for people in town, taking in alterations, doing whatever she could to keep food on the table. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And Lorraine made sure Simone knew she was loved. Every single day. Lorraine used to tell Simone stories at night, stories about a man she called Papa, Simone's grandfather, a man who loved them but couldn't be with them. Lorraine never explained why. She'd just smile sadly and say, "Life pulled us apart, baby girl, but one day he'll find you." Simone was only 3 years old when her grandfather gave her the locket. She didn't remember much about that day, just flashes, big hands lifting her up, a deep voice calling her, "My heart," the cool metal of the locket being placed around her neck, and then he was gone. When Simone was 8 years old, her mother got sick, real sick, the kind of sick that didn't get better no matter how many prayers were said or how many doctors they saw. Lorraine tried to reach out to Simone's grandfather before she died. She wrote letters, made phone calls, did everything she could to find him, but she never got a response. And when Lorraine passed, Simone was alone. The state put her in foster care. She bounced from house to house, family to family, never staying long enough to feel like she belonged anywhere. She kept the locket, though, wore it every single day. It was the only thing that reminded her she'd once been loved. Simone aged out of the system when she turned 18. No family, no money, no safety net. But she didn't let that break her. She worked 2 jobs to pay for community college, studied at night, and eventually became a medical assistant. She believed in goodness, even when life gave her every reason not to. She believed in love, even though she'd lost everyone who'd ever loved her. That's when she met Brandon. He was charming, smooth-talking, the kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He worked at the hospital in administration, always dressed nice, always smiling. He pursued her hard, brought her flowers, took her to nice restaurants, made her feel like she mattered. And when he asked her to marry him after 6 months, she said yes. She thought she'd finally found her family. But after the wedding, everything changed. Beverly ran that house like a dictator. She controlled the money, the decisions, the atmosphere. Brandon stopped being the man Simone had fallen in love with. He became distant, cold, more interested in pleasing his mother than standing up for his wife. They made Simone feel small. They called her country. They mocked the way she talked, the way she dressed, the fact that she didn't come from money. And Simone just kept trying, kept working, kept hoping things would get better. They never did. Back in that locked room, hours had passed. Simone had cried until there were no tears left. She'd paced the floor until her legs gave out. Now she just sat there, leaning against the door, listening to the party downstairs. Candace's shrill laughter cut through the walls like nails on a chalkboard. Beverly's commanding voice directed people around like she was hosting a gala. The music was loud, celebratory, mocking. Simone eventually closed her eyes, exhausted from crying, from thinking, from trying to make sense of how her life had become this nightmare. She fell asleep right there on the floor, her cheek pressed against the carpet, her hand still clutching the locket. Downstairs, the front door opened. The elderly man from the Rolls-Royce stepped inside, his lawyer close behind him. The party noise dimmed for a moment as people turned to look. Beverly, ever the hostess, immediately put on her brightest smile and walked toward him with her hand extended. "Good evening. Welcome. I'm Beverly Harrison. Are you one of Brandon's associates?" The old man didn't take her hand. He looked around the room slowly, his eyes scanning every face, every corner, like he was searching for something or someone. His voice, when he finally spoke, was deep and controlled, the kind of voice that commanded respect without having to ask for it. "Where is Simone Montgomery?" Beverly's smile faltered. She blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, who?" "My granddaughter, Simone Montgomery. I was told she lives here." The room went dead silent. You could hear people's breath catch in their throats. Brandon, who'd been leaning against the bar with a drink in his hand, straightened up, his face pale. "Sir, I think there's been some kind of mistake," Brandon said, his voice shaky. "My wife's name is Simone, but her last name is Harrison now, and I don't think—" "Her mother was Lorraine Montgomery," the old man interrupted, his eyes locked on Brandon like a predator sizing up prey. "My daughter. I've been searching for Simone for 23 years. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Where is she?" Beverly's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The old man's lawyer stepped forward holding a leather folder. "Mr. William Montgomery is the founder and CEO of Montgomery Global Enterprises. Perhaps you've heard of it." Montgomery Global Enterprises, $95 billion, properties in 42 countries, 17 corporate boards, one of the most powerful black-owned companies in the world. And this man, this William Montgomery, was standing in their living room asking for Simone. Beverly's voice came out in a whisper. She's upstairs. She wasn't feeling well. She's resting." William didn't wait for permission. He turned toward the staircase, his lawyer and chauffeur following. Beverly tried to say something, tried to stop him, but Gerald grabbed her arm and shook his head. The look on his face said it all. They'd made a mistake A catastrophic, life-destroying mistake. William climbed the stairs slowly, his hand on the railing, his heart pounding in his chest. 23 years. 23 years of searching, of hiring investigators, of following dead-end leads. 23 years of regret for the pride that had cost him his daughter. And now finally he was about to see his granddaughter, the child he'd only held once, the child he'd lost because he'd been too stubborn to forgive. He reached the door at the end of the hallway. His lawyer had already spoken to the house manager outside, had already gotten the key. The lock clicked. The door opened. Simone was curled up on the floor, her back against the door, her face tear-stained and exhausted. She woke up when the door moved, her eyes opening slowly, confused. She saw the silhouette of a man standing in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. For a moment she thought it was Brandon coming to apologize. But then the man stepped forward and the light hit his face. Simone's breath caught in her throat. She knew that face. She'd stared at it every night for as long as she could remember. The face in the locket. Simone. William's voice was soft, broken, barely more than a whisper. She looked up at him, her hand instinctively reaching for the locket around her neck. She opened it with trembling fingers, looked at the photo inside, then looked back at the man standing in front of her. "Papa?" The word shattered him. William Montgomery, a man who'd built an empire, who'd commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, dropped to his knees in front of his granddaughter and wept. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking, his hands reaching for hers. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I let pride destroy us. I lost your mother, I lost you, but I found you now, and I'm never losing you again." Simone couldn't speak, couldn't think. All she could do was cry as her grandfather pulled her into his arms, holding her the way she'd needed to be held for 23 years. Downstairs, the party had died. Everyone stood frozen, drinks in hand, eyes wide, watching as William Montgomery helped Simone down the stairs. Her face was red from crying, her scrubs wrinkled, her hair a mess, but she walked down those stairs with her head up, her hand in her grandfather's hand, and for the first time in 4 years, she didn't feel small. William stopped at the bottom of the staircase. He looked around the room, his eyes landing on each person, one by one. Beverly, Gerald, Brandon, Candace. The aunts, the uncles, the cousins, all of them. When he spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. "This is my granddaughter, Simone Montgomery, sole heir to Montgomery Global Enterprises. $95 billion. She owns properties in 42 countries. She sits on the board of 17 corporations." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room like a blanket of ice. "And you locked her in a room like she was nothing." Beverly's hands shook. She tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to salvage the unsalvageable. "Mr. Montgomery, we had no idea. If we had known—" "If you had known she was rich," William said, his voice cutting through her excuses like a blade, "you would have treated her like a human being. That tells me everything I need to know about you." He turned to Simone, his expression softening. "Do you want to say anything to these people?" Simone looked at Brandon, the man she'd loved, the man she'd worked for, the man who'd let his family drag her upstairs and lock her away. He was pale now, shaking, his eyes wide with panic. He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out. "Simone, baby, please," he said, his voice desperate. "I didn't know. We didn't know. We can fix this. We can—" "You locked me in a room, Brandon," Simone's voice was quiet, but it carried through the room like thunder. While your mistress wore my jewelry, while your family celebrated my removal, you didn't need to know I was rich to treat me like I mattered. You just needed to be a decent human being. She pulled her wedding ring off her finger. It had never felt right anyway. Too tight, too heavy. She placed it on the table next to where Candace was sitting. I don't need your apology, Simone said. I don't need anything from you. I never did. She turned toward the door, her grandfather's arm around her shoulders, but before she left, she stopped, turned back one last time, looked at Beverly, at Gerald, at every single person in that room who'd watched her suffer, and said nothing. By the way, Simone said, her voice steady and calm, this house? My grandfather's company owns the building. You have 30 days to vacate. And then she walked out, into the night, into the rest of her life. The fallout was biblical. Brandon lost his job 3 days later. Turns out it had been a nepotism hire through Beverly's connections, and once those connections learned what had happened, they wanted nothing to do with the Harrison family. Candace, the woman who'd laughed while Simone was dragged upstairs, who'd worn Simone's jewelry like a trophy, disappeared the moment she realized Brandon had no money, no job, no prospects. She didn't even leave a note. Just packed her things and left him sitting in his parents' apartment, staring at the eviction notice. Beverly and Gerald were forced out of their home within the month. The house they'd lived in for 15 years, the house they'd used to show off their status, was owned by Montgomery Global Enterprises. They'd been renting it the whole time, living beyond their means, pretending to be wealthier than they were. Now they were moving into a 2-bedroom apartment across town, and every single one of Beverly's so-called friends had stopped returning her calls. The extended family, the aunts and uncles and cousins, who'd sat silently at that dinner table and watched Simone's humiliation, started reaching out. They sent messages through mutual acquaintances, wrote emails, even showed up at Montgomery Global's offices trying to apologize, trying to explain that they'd had no idea, that they'd always liked Simone, that they wanted to make things right. But Simone's assistant, a sharp woman William had hired specifically to handle situations like this, sent the same response to every single one of them. Ms. Montgomery is not available. The story spread through their social circles like wildfire. Within weeks, everyone knew. The woman they'd mocked, the woman they'd called simple and country, the woman they'd treated like she was lucky to be in their presence, was a billionaire heiress, and the people who'd humiliated her were now the ones being humiliated. Invitations were revoked. Business deals fell through. People who'd once smiled in Beverly's face now crossed the street to avoid her. Brandon tried one last time to reach Simone. He showed up at Montgomery Global's headquarters, asked to see her, said he had something important to say. Security escorted him out. He stood on the sidewalk outside, staring up at the building, realizing he'd had something precious and thrown it away because he was too weak to stand up to his mother, too shallow to see what was right in front of him. Candace tried to spin the situation on social media, posting old photos of herself and Brandon, acting like she'd been the victim of some elaborate scheme. But people weren't stupid. The comments tore her apart. She deleted her accounts within a week and moved back to her hometown, where no one knew her name. 6 months passed. Spring turned into summer, summer into fall. Simone stood on the balcony of her new home, a beautiful townhouse she'd chosen herself. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't some gaudy display of wealth. It was simple, elegant, peaceful, everything she'd ever wanted. She'd started the Lorraine Montgomery Foundation in her mother's name. It provided resources for foster children, scholarships for single mothers, safe housing for women escaping abusive relationships. The kind of help Simone wished she'd had when she was younger. The kind of help that could change lives. William visited every Sunday. They cooked together, talked about Lorraine, shared stories about the years they had lost. He told her about the regret that had eaten him alive, about the pride that had cost him his daughter. She told him about the foster homes, the loneliness, the years of wondering if anyone would ever love her again. They cried together, laughed together, healed together. Simone was in therapy now, working through the trauma, the betrayal, the years of being told she wasn't enough. It was hard work. Some days were better than others. But she was getting stronger, not because of the money, not because of the power, but because she was finally learning to love herself the way she deserved to be loved. One Sunday evening, after dinner, William sat across from her at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. He watched her for a long moment, his eyes soft with affection and something that looked like pride. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked quietly. "The years of struggle? The pain?" Simone touched the locket around her neck, the same locket she'd worn for 23 years, the locket that had connected her to a man she'd barely remembered, but never stopped hoping would find her. "No, Papa," she said softly, "because those years taught me who I really am, not what I own, not what I'm worth in dollars, but who I am when I have nothing. That's the person I want to keep being." The next day, Simone drove out to the cemetery where her mother was buried. She'd been there a few times since reuniting with William, but this time felt different. This time felt like closure. She walked through the rows of headstones until she found Lorraine's grave, knelt down, and placed a bouquet of white lilies on the ground. "We found each other, Mama," Simone whispered, her fingers tracing her mother's name on the stone. "Just like you said we would." She stayed there for a while, talking to her mother the way she used to when she was a little girl, telling her about the foundation, about the people they were helping, about the life she was building. A life that honored everything Lorraine had taught her about kindness, about resilience, about never losing yourself no matter how hard the world tried to break you. When Simone finally stood up and walked back to the parking lot, William was waiting by the car. Not a Rolls-Royce this time, just a simple sedan, because they didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. They had each other, they had peace, they had love, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. See, the thing about real wealth is this: it's not about what you have, it's about who you are when you have nothing. Simone was rich in character long before she ever knew about the $95 billion. And that's why she survived. That's why she won. Not because money saved her, but because she never lost herself, even when they tried to break her. She stayed kind when the world was cruel. She stayed strong when they tried to make her small. She stayed true to who she was, even when no one was watching. And in the end, that's what real power looks like. Not revenge, not destruction, but the ability to walk away with your dignity intact, knowing that the people who hurt you will have to live with what they did, while you get to live in peace. I'll see you in the next story. Peace